Welcome to Wrestling Cycle. Weekly review of WWE Raw, the only wrestling show that compels us to completely ignore the very biggest stars and focus solely on everyone else. Okay, it's probably not the only wrestling show that does that, but it's still funny that there was a segment on Monday's episode that featured Drew McIntyre, Randy Orton, Gunther, and CM Punk, and our collective response here at WINC was to blink slowly and then move on. What we're trying to say here is that this column will not discuss that particular segment, primarily because there are tons of things on a 3-hour show that we don't have the time or space to discuss. If you were hoping for our opinions about Odyssey Jones' debut, or the Ivy Nile heel turn, or even the brief Wyatt Six video, we're very sorry to disappoint you, but those will not be coming up here. Silver lining. If you have no idea what we were talking about in that last sentence, you can read about all those things on our Raw results page. They will simply be more facts and less opinion. Second silver lining. If you were hoping for our opinions on other stuff, like the Judgment Day fallout, or Bronson Reed's Rampage, or the main event, we have all that for you here, and more. Here are 3 things we hated and 3 things we loved about the 8th of December 24 episode of WWE Raw. Hated. Terror Twins vs. New Judgment Day already feels redundant. WWE. I don't know if I'm feeling this way because the Bloodline segments on WWE SmackDown have felt incredibly redundant for weeks before the return of Roman Reigns at SummerSlam, but I'm just already not feeling this New Judgment Day versus the Terror Twins angle. Of course, I wasn't thrilled when Dominic Mysterio turned on Rhea Ripley, simply due to the fact I saw that coming a mile away and hated that turn and story to begin with, but especially now with Ripley and Damian Priest taking on Mysterio and Liv Morgan at Bash in Berlin at the end of the month, things are only going to start feeling even more redundant than they already do. And, in the words of apparent full-fledged New Judgment Day member, Carlito, that's not cool. While there was a little more talking in the ring from Ripley this week, which I'll never complain about, and the image of Priest just kind of appearing in the crowd behind Morgan and Mysterio from out of nowhere to beat up Mysterio was a great and funny image, but it led to Priest having a match with another member of the New Judgment Day. This week, it was Carlito. Last week, it was JD McDonough. The only thing that won't be entirely redundant, I think, at least, is the fact Priest and Balor likely won't go head-to-head before Bash in Berlin. I don't exactly know what show they'll save that for, but I think it's a big match with the potential to be a great blood feud that WWE should let simmer for a while. Get Priest away from Mysterio and Morgan, and focused on Balor, after this premium live event in Germany. While I understand Priest is furious with Mysterio for hurting Ripley, I think Mommy can fight her own battles against Morgan. Maybe even get the Women's World Championship back, because Morgan certainly hasn't been defending it since she'd had it. A BX babyface Ripley with the championship back over her shoulder taking on all challengers is what I want to see on my Raw. Thankfully, we only have 2 more episodes of Raw before Bash in Berlin, and I'm certain they're only going to consist of more in-ring promos, probably one from the good guys, then the next week, the bad guys, or vice versa, both in-ring, then the other team comes and crashes the promo and there's a pull-apart brawl. For 2 more episodes, I'm also certain the next 2 weeks, no matter what they do, aren't going to get me any more excited. For this match, the match makes sense, and I wanted to see Priest and Ripley beat up Mysterio and Morgan, but I think I'm already at a stable level of just not excitement, per se, but just ready to hopefully see that. This is one of those angles I can just tell is going to fall flat, especially on the go-home show, and I'm just ready for them to fight in Berlin. Loved. Pete Dunne wants everyone to remember who he is. 2 years ago, Pete Dunne got saddled with a different name, even though the WWE Universe in the US and abroad already knew who he was. When he linked up with Sheamus and Ridge Holland as part of the Brawling Brutes, he was forced to go by the name, Butch. We all hated it, but not as much as the Bruiserweight himself did. His resentment of both the name and having to operate under Sheamus has boiled over into getting physical with his former partner and costing him matches. In a segment on Raw, he became infuriated when Jackie Redmond mentioned his former moniker. For 2 years I had to swallow my pride and let Sheamus' little brother me, he said. I'm not Butch, I'm Pete Dunne, I'm the Bruiserweight, I'm an 18-year vet in my own right. And if I have to shut Sheamus up so I never ever hear that name again, that's what I'll do. Done having to make himself into someone he's not because of the people at the top was a waste of 2 years. He has long been a special talent, so much so that he was the second ever NXT UK champion and held that title for a whopping 685 days. He is a former NXT Tag Team Champion as well. His main roster run has left a lot to be desired through no fault of his own. He did the best with what he was given. Defeating Sheamus next week would talk him one step closer to becoming the force we all know him to be. Hated. PFC, not to be confused with PVC pipe. WWE, the women's tag team division, against all odds, is heating up. Multiple female factions have started to join the tag team gold scramble, and the unholy union now have to worry about the likes of Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair, Io Sky and Kairi Sane of Damage Control, the possible team of Micah and Shotzi, and the Pure Fusion Collective. It seems like a petty or infinitesimal thing to hate, but if WWE's goal is to build the women's tag team division back up through name power and numbers, then naming Monday Night's primary all-female heel faction something so nonsensical seems counterproductive at best, and destructive at worst. The trio of Shayna Baszler, Sonya Deville, and Zoe Stark have captured the attention of fans ever since Deville's return to WWE programming, and while they have yet to gain serious momentum, they have wreaked havoc on their rival faction, the newly babyface Damage Control, by taking out Dakota Kai and shelving her for the foreseeable future. If this stable is being built to be the seriously diabolical force we are led to believe, then why name the trio something so out of left field? Pure Fusion Collective. It doesn't ring true with any of the women involved, nor does it accurately describe their identity as a unit. It feels like the name was decided separately from the team, and when there's that level of disconnect in a stable made of superstars that are as shakily booked as Baszler, Deville, and Stark, it could spell trouble for their efforts to break into the limelight. Upon further research, Pure Fusion is a concept associated with weapons manufacturing, particularly in the use of nuclear bombs. Does this mean they have nuclear energy? Are they explosive? Do they not need an external fuse to trigger a detonation? We won't sit here for a science lesson about what pure fusion means, but it should say something when I have to look up what pure fusion means and extrapolate how it might connect to Pure Fusion Collective. There is beauty in subtext, but when it comes to a team of let's try pushing you again, women in an even more contentiously featured women's tag team division, I'm not sure if it's necessarily wise to have such an obscure reference as a central piece to the team's identity. Also, it sounds too close to PVC pipe. This is Raw, not Home Depot. Any wrestling fan should know that these performers walk on a tightrope. Any flaw in their identity or missed opportunity to connect with fans can halt their momentum. When Pure Fusion Collective is trying to break out against established names like Damage Control or Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair, there is no room for error. So, what's in a name? I'm not saying that a bad name will halt the Pure Fusion Collective's push in its tracks, but for a breakout team, it certainly doesn't help. Hated. A senseless contenders match. WWE, Getty Images. It seems pretty inevitable that when a wrestler is at the announce desk, they're going to become involved in a match in some sort of capacity, whether that's interference or a post-match brawl. While that's usually all fun and games, in the case of Alba Fire and Isla Dawn being at the desk to watch the number one contenders match between the Pure Fusion Collective and Damage Control, it not only seemed unnecessary to have the title holders get involved in the action, but made little sense the way that WWE did it. Zoe Stark inadvertently caught Alba Fire with a kick on the outside when she was aiming for Io Sky. While it would have otherwise been fine, it was only when Sky delivered an over the moonsault to Stark and pinned her that Fire and Dawn decided to get involved. If they needed to get involved in things at all, it would have made much more sense to have them to have broken up a fall when Stark was the one pinning Sky. The whole point of a number one contenders match is to determine which competitor or competitors, if it pertains to a tag team, earn the right to challenge a champion or champions for their title. With WWE seemingly gearing up to announce either a triple threat or a fatal four-way match with the three teams and Jade Cargill and Bianca Belair for the WWE Women's Tag Team Championship, presumably at Bash in Berlin, it would make more sense for the company to focus on the build for the story rather than end a number one contenders match in a double disqualification. It's a needless step in getting where the company wants to go, and it makes little sense in the context of what is trying to be accomplished here, especially when taking into consideration how many matches across WWE programming end in disqualifications. Loved. Big Bronson Reed has become a big deal. WWE. In 2 weeks' time, Bronson Reed has done more to establish himself than the entirety of his main roster run prior. Or perhaps WWE Creative should get the credit for unleashing this beast at long last. It's a combo of both, really, so a tip of the hat to all involved. How do you top absolutely slaughtering someone as perpetually popular as Seth freakin' Rollins? You do the same, or maybe worse, to someone as universally loved as R-Truth. And that's exactly what happened tonight, with Reed first beating The Miz and then, post-match, looking to attack Miz in similar, tsunami after tsunami fashion as he did Rollins a week ago. Noble hero that he is, Truth stepped in front of Miz to thwart Reed's assault, and took a hybrid flying crossbody tsunami situation for his trouble. And then, much like the now shelved Rollins, he got hit with 6 more tsunamis, despite the protests of WWE Raw GM Adam Pearce and a slew of other WWE officials. Were I forced to critique anything here, I would argue that Reed should have absolutely destroyed Miz in the match itself, but that's a nit I shan't pick at present, instead focusing on all that was done well in the name of productivity for all in tonight's exchange. Other than the continued momentum behind an elevation of Reed's character, this could very easily set things up nicely for a Miz-Truth split down the road, which is no great surprise but needed to have some building blocks in place. Miz wasn't happy with Truth confusing Reed for Intercontinental Champion Bron Breakker, who would have killed Miz too, but hey, at least a title would have been on the line had Truth been right, and Truth took the bullet, and then 6 more, for Miz, who was then nowhere to be found in his defense. But to make sure we're not losing sight of what's most important here, Bronson Reed didn't become anything more than he already was just by adding "big" to his name. In fact, that was probably pointless. In these last 2 weeks, however, he's very quickly cemented himself as a big deal. Written by John Jordan. Loved. The match we should have gotten at SummerSlam. WWE. It's weird to think about the fact that in 2024 WWE, it's almost better, from a match quality standpoint, to be left off the premium live events. Sure, it's great if you're Gunther or Cody Rhodes or CM Punk or The Bloodline, because Paul Levesque is probably giving your match way more time than it actually needs. But if you're one of these undercard feuds, aka the people whose time is getting cut for Gunther and Cody and Punk and The Bloodline, you'd almost rather not make the card at all, right? Because instead of a truncated undercard PLE match squashed at either end by commercials, you're probably getting like 20 minutes to main event, Raw, or SmackDown. I don't know, that just seems way more fun to me. Anyway, this is all just a long way of saying that the Raw main event featuring the 3rd Intercontinental title match between Sami Zayn and Bron Breakker was by far the best of their matches, and the first one that really made both guys look good. It basically felt like Zayn and Breakker, whose SummerSlam match didn't even last 6 minutes, were being given this spot by way of an apology, and by extension, it was also an apology to the fans. Well, apology accepted, WWE, because this match ruled. 2 out of 3 Falls matches were a bit of a thing for Zayn back in his NXT days. His 2 out of 3 Falls match with Claudio Castagnoli in 2013 was the first great NXT match and helped launch the brand, and since 2024 Zayn, like 2013 Zayn, is eternally an underdog. He's the perfect kind of wrestler for the oldest stipulation. In fact, this match was structured essentially the same way that Zayn vs. Castagnoli match was structured, with Zayn picking up the first fall after a flash Helluva kick and then losing the following 2. The match got enough time, just barely, it was well paced, and by the end it felt like Breakker had really earned something by keeping Sami down for that last 3. As Wrestling Inc.'s resident Sami Zayn superfan, I don't mind him dropping the Intercontinental title to Bron Breakker. I just wanted Bron to have to work for it. This week, he did. 3 things are certain in this world: death, taxes, and Monday Night Raw, airing on Monday nights. Raw is oftentimes dubbed the longest-running weekly episodic television show in history, which has some pieces of truth with a few weasel words mixed in. Monday Night Raw, as WWE themselves note, does indeed have the most episodes for a show that runs live on a weekly basis, clocking in at over 1,500 episodes. That being said, there are shows that have been on the air for more years, such as The Simpsons. The difference is, these shows have not produced new episodes on a weekly basis all year long. Throughout the years, WWE has added and dropped programming in their weekly lineup, but Monday Night Raw has been a staple since it started in January of 1993. A lot has happened throughout that monstrous amount of programming, and Raw has gone through changes to its appearance, the way in which storylines are presented, and the talent that is featured weekly. Monday Night Raw has given fans many memorable matches, feuds, and segments, but there are many pieces about the history of Raw that's often forgotten about. The name Raw was derived from a feeling. WWE.com. Wrestling show names are always ones that pack a punch and are easily marketable, such as SmackDown, Nitro, Dynamite, and many more. All these names are explosive in context, except Raw doesn't quite fit the bill. In fact, Raw originated more from the idea of what the WWF wanted Monday Night Raw to feel like. Bruce Pritchard, who was Vince's right-hand man at this time, said on the Not Sam podcast HT Ringside News that WWF wanted a show that was grungy, dirty, and unpolished. WWF wanted to show the audience that anything could happen, and the feeling that even those working on the show didn't know what was going to happen at any given moment. At one point the working name was Down and Dirty, but the marketability of that was low. With some more wordsmithing and discussions about the look and vibe of the show, Vince McMahon and producers decided they wanted the show to feel raw, and the rest is history. On January 11, 1993, Monday Night Raw hit the airwaves as an uncut, uncooked, and uncensored broadcast. Raw only emanated from the Manhattan Center at first. WWE YouTube. The first episode of Monday Night Raw, and many episodes after, emanated from the beautiful Manhattan Center in New York City. Per PWI Insider, Vince McMahon had a grand vision for Raw, where it would take place in an elegant setting, giving the show an upscale sort of vibe. However, the Manhattan Center did not last as a permanent venue, with some rumors suggesting that it was a nightmare for fans to get in and out of the building. The Raw tapings took place on the 8th floor, giving over 1,000 fans the choice to either take one of two elevators or run up 8 flights of stairs. In addition, some wrestlers complained about the cost of relocating to New York City in order to complete sets of tapings. After leaving, WWE has returned to the Manhattan Center 2 other times since they originally left, once in 1997 and one more time in 2018 for the Raw 25th Anniversary Special. The first ever post-WrestleMania Raw was nothing special. WWE.com. WrestleMania weekend is a majorly hyped time for both fans and media alike, and this hype has strengthened ever since WWE has made WrestleMania a 2-night spectacle. The Raw immediately after WrestleMania has come into its own over the last decade as well. This episode of Raw always features a hot crowd, fallout from WrestleMania, and big debuts and surprises. However, the first Raw after WrestleMania, as recounted by Cageside Seats, was not even close to as exciting as it is now. The first Raw after WrestleMania came after a lackluster WrestleMania X show. This Raw took place on April 5, 1993 and was actually filmed before WrestleMania X. The most notable part was the Raw debut of Jerry, the King, Lawler. Lawler started as an announcer for WWF Superstars a year prior and had wrestled in the 1993 Royal Rumble along with the Territories for years. However, this was the first time fans saw Lawler compete in the ring on Raw. He faced Jim Powers and walked out of the match twice due to fans chanting, "Burger King," at him. Watching this Raw will make any fan appreciate what the Raw after WrestleMania has become. The first title change happened early on. WWE.com. Championship title changes are not always commonplace on Monday Night Raw. Usually reserved for pay-per-view matches, a title change on Raw can make an episode historic. In May of 1993, Raw had been on the air for about 4 months. On the May 13th episode of Monday Night Raw. That year, Shawn Michaels, the Intercontinental Champion at the time, faced his longtime tag team partner, Marty Jannetty. Jannetty defeated Michaels to capture the Intercontinental Championship, and although his title reign only lasted 20 days, this title change helped boost the credibility of Raw as a major player on Monday nights. The first World Championship title change didn't come until February 17, 1997, when Psycho Sid defeated Bret Hart for the belt. The most prominent change happened on December 29, 1998, which aired the following week. The main event of this pre-taped episode of Raw saw The Rock vs. Mankind with the WWF title on the line. Mankind had garnered quite a bit of fan attention at this time, and in a huge upset, he defeated The Rock to win his first WWF Championship. This episode of Raw certainly put some butts in the seats. The Brian Pillman and Stone Cold Gun segment almost got the show cancelled. WWE YouTube. One of the most infamous segments in Raw history happened during the heated feud between Stone Cold, Steve Austin and Brian Pillman. This segment saw Steve Austin break into Pillman's house for a confrontation and Brian Pillman pull a gun on Stone Cold. A chaotic scene unfolds as Kevin Kelly, who was there to interview Pillman, tries to defuse the situation and Pillman's wife cries on the couch. Raw goes off the air as Pillman is still wildly pointing the gun. Vince McMahon's hope with this segment was to bring more realism to the product and begin to steer away from the cartoony feel of Monday Night Raw. However, as recounted by eWrestling, this segment was so authentic that many parents called USA Network to express their concerns about the violent content. Many advertisers were concerned as well. This led USA Network almost dropping Monday Night Raw from their programming lineup. Once things cooled down, it was agreed within WWF management to tone down the content a bit and that the Austin-Pillman segment was too much. Of course, later down the line, WWF continued pushing boundaries when during the Attitude Era in earnest, despite the controversy that this segment produced. In addition, it was a launch pad into what would become the true, Stone Cold, Steve Austin character. An episode of Raw showed the 1997 Royal Rumble kind of. WWE.com. The 1997 Royal Rumble match had a controversial ending as Steve Austin was declared the official winner. The problem was, Austin was actually eliminated earlier in the match, but referees had failed to catch his feet touching the ground. The ending of the match led to a lot of confusion and, to capitalize on this confusion, WWF marketed the January 27, 1997 episode of Raw as Royal Rumble Raw. This was the first 2-hour broadcast of Monday Night Raw per Sportskeeda, and many fans thought they were going to get to see the controversial Royal Rumble that had happened 24 hours prior. Unfortunately, all fans got was a filler card with some Royal Rumble match highlights sprinkled in. The problem was pay-per-view was a huge money maker in these days, and there was no way Vince McMahon and cable providers alike were actually going to air the whole Royal Rumble match when there was pay-per-view replay money to be had. There was a Thursday Night Raw. WWE.com. In 1997, the WWF and Monday Night Raw were constantly getting clobbered in ratings war against WCW, Nitro. The two shows would go head-to-head one the same night, at the same time slot. This made Vince McMahon wonder what would happen if Raw aired unopposed on a different night per Cultured Vultures. This thought brought a unique Thursday Night Raw broadcast on February 13, 1997, which actually turned out to be a huge episode. The most notable piece of the show was when Shawn Michaels came out to tell fans he was relinquishing his WWF Championship because he had lost his smile. What that means exactly is still up for interpretation, but at the time, the storyline was that Michaels had a career-threatening knee injury. Regardless of the true meaning, this changed the trajectory for WrestleMania 13. In fact, it blew the door wide open for one of the biggest stars to come from wrestling, Stone Cold, Steve Austin. From this unique Raw forward, Austin began feuding with Bret Hart, bringing them to a dramatic climax at WrestleMania 13, and an instant classic was born amidst a double turn. It raises the question, would this have ever happened if Shawn Michaels didn't lose his smile on Thursday Night Raw? The highest rated episode of Raw drew an 8.1 rating. WWE YouTube. The highest-rated episode of Monday Night Raw happened due to a stroke of luck for WWF and some misfortunes for WCW. The May 10, 1999 episode of Raw drew an astounding 8.1 rating, following the trend of growing ratings for the WWF. This, Raw, was building toward a highly anticipated over-the-edge pay-per-view on the horizon. There were a few things that garnered the 8.1 rating for the WWF via Bleacher Report. First, WCW had been preempted by the NBA playoffs, so Raw ran unopposed that Monday night. In addition, Raw stacked the card with a star-studded main event. It saw the team of Steve Austin, The Rock, and Vince McMahon take on the team of Triple H, Undertaker, and Shane McMahon. This match was a combination of different rivalries coming together to make a TV match magic, and the ratings reflected that. Raw wasn't always on the USA Network. WWE YouTube. USA Network had been home to Monday Night Raw since it began on January 11, 1993 all the way up until September 18, 2000. Starting on September 25, 2000, the Raw product jumped ship to be part of TNN, Spike TV, and joined the Viacom family for 5 years. On October 3, 2005, Raw had a homecoming episode that aired on the USA Network for the first time in 5 years. There were some reports via Sportskeeda that over time that the USA Network regretted letting Raw go to Spike TV in hindsight. On episode 232 of Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Pritchard, who acted as the executive producer of Raw at the time, summarized their line of thinking at the time. We're looking at NBC Universal as a whole, and the different partnerships that we have, and how we can utilize those and go through in the doors that opened up not just from one little USA Network in Monday Night Raw, across the board with theme parks, which we did partnerships with the Universal theme parks and did different things. Since this time, WWE has had a great relationship with USA Network and has aired weekly since. WWE has also dabbled in attractions at Universal Studios, including one called The Undertaker, No Mercy, and the sale of wrestler-branded T-shirts at the park. Raw used to get bumped due to the Westminster Dog Show. Lev Radin, Shutterstock, airing on Monday in prime time has always been an identifying factor of the Raw brand, but that wasn't always the case when the Westminster Dog Show needed a slot on the USA Network. The Westminster Dog Show ran annually with Per Awful announcing Night 1 airing on CNBC and Night 2 airing on the USA Network, starting in 1984. Throughout the years, the two shows clashed a handful times, causing Raw to have to move to a different night, such as Saturday Night Raw. In 1999, it still aired on Monday in Canada, or be preempted altogether like it was in 2006 via cageside seats. Sometimes WWE would put on alternative programming that happened before the dog show went live. In 2006, Tori and her dog Chloe hosted WWE Best in Show on WWE.com, looking back at WWE's coolest and craziest canine moments over the years. In 2017, Raw stopped being in danger of preemption, as the dog show began primarily airing on Fox Sports 1. It was always a strange occurrence to see a juggernaut of a show like Monday Night Raw get pushed out of the way by the Westminster Dog Show, but hey, those dogs need to win championships too. Why Raw dropped the war in Raw's War. WWE YouTube. As the WWF moved to an edgier product during the Attitude Era, they also wanted an edgier name to Raw, hence, Raw's War. In addition, the second half of Raw was called the War Zone, to help freshen the show up as it went into the last hour. This idea of considering Raw a war zone started in 1997, just on the cusp of the Attitude Era. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 changed WWF's thought on using war as a marketing tool for their weekly Raw broadcast. As talks of a war on terror began to grow, WWF brought their weekly Monday show back to just Monday Night Raw, and also dropped the idea of the War Zone in the second hour per TJR Wrestling. Since then, we have not seen Raw get an official rebrand in this way, unless of course, we want to count Raw Underground or the short stint of Raw After Dark. The Raw after Royal Rumble 2015 was postponed due to snow. WWE YouTube. The year is 2015. Roman Reigns is getting booed and fans are calling him overrated. The negativity doesn't seem to matter because Roman Reigns wins the 2015 Royal Rumble to the anger of everyone at home and in the arena. Not even The Rock can save him with his promo skills. Now everyone wanted to know how WWE would do damage control, and they wanted to hear the live audience reactions from the Raw crowd in Hartford, Connecticut. However, Mother Nature also hated Roman Reigns and WWE's booking at the time, and a huge snowstorm hit the New England area. The arena canceled Raw from happening live. WWE still had to fill 3 hours of programming on Monday night to uphold their contract with USA Network. The January 26, 2015 episode of Raw was filled with a lot of backstage interviews emanating from WWE headquarters, most notably one with Roman Reigns and then WWE champion Brock Lesnar via The Washington Post. In addition, WWE showed highlights and recaps from the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Needless to say, it was a highly anticipated Raw that quickly became one of the most forgettable. Which superstar holds the most Monday Night Raw appearances? WWE.com. One of the unique pieces of being the longest-running weekly episodic television show in history is the fact that some characters stick around for the long haul. Similar to a soap opera, WWE has featured some wrestlers' characters hundreds of times on Monday Night Raw. It's a fair guess that John Cena holds the record for the most appearances performed on Raw, and at one point that was the case. However, within the last couple years, Randy Orton has stolen that title from Cena, clocking in at over 450 appearances at the time of writing. Orton was brought into WWE, quickly joined the Evolution stable in 2002, and later went on to become the youngest World Heavyweight Champion. With these early career accolades and Randy Orton's more recent appearances in the tag team RK Bro, it makes sense that Orton was able to surpass John Cena in appearances. Other honorable mentions for this section are Kane at 442 appearances and Chris Jericho at 425 appearances.